Good morning. I am steeped in all things Mary. Mary came to visit our Watergate offices of the Atlantic a couple weeks ago, and we had a chance to talk about her. And then I spent the last few days reading profiles of her. And so this will be terrible for Mary, but what I thought I would do is tell you in 60 seconds everything you could ever want to know about Mary Barra. This will be a little like drowning for you. You'll see your whole life going before your eyes. But here we go. So Mary was born in the early days of the 1960s, which was altogether a bad decade, but that was a good thing in that decade. She was born in a bedroom community of Detroit called Royal Oak. Her mom is a bookkeeper. Her father was pure General Motors. He was on the Pontiac line for 39 years. He was a die maker, member of the UAW. It's hard to overstate the role that General Motors has had in Mary's life. So every year of her life, it has been the meals on the table. At 18, she had her first job with General Motors. She was working on the assembly line, doing checking of quality on hoods and fender panels. General Motors put her through its own university, the General Motors Institute of Technology, put her through Stanford for an MBA, the only employer of her life, for 38 years now at General Motors. And if you can believe this, for 33 of them, she was not allowed to be the CEO of the company. So she's been CEO of General Motors. The announcement was in December of 2013. It's been a big, large, good company she's inherited now, or at least that she has now. First largest automaker in the United States, second largest in China. For those of you who are city administrators and mayors, it's a city. It's a population of 200,000 employees. It differs from most small towns or small cities in that they made 14 million cars last year. And we're talking to Mary in a good hour for General Motors, good hour in her career. Business Insider ran a profile story this month. Let me read you the headline. How General Motors went from bankrupt and on the brink of death to being one of the world's best run car companies. And then they refer to Mary's team as the best management team GM's ever had and one of the best C-suites in all of business. And finally, and here I'm not breaking news, Mary loves cars. So this comes from the Stanford Alumni Magazine in 2011. Mary was about 10 years old when she first fell in love with a car. It was a red Chevy Camaro convertible, late vintage 60s, driven by her older cousin. When Barra describes it, her brown eyes widened and her cheeks flushed just a touch. It was just a beautiful, beautiful vehicle, she says. The first vehicle where I went, wow, that is cool. But then, even for the future CEO of General Motors, real life sets in. She headed off for college, worried about trunk space. So the first car Mary bought was a Chevrolet Chevette. It's a terrible metaphor for adult life, wanting the Camaro, needing trunk space, and getting the Chevette. So Mary, if you'll indulge this, I'll go to General Motors in a moment, but let me just ask a couple personal questions about you and cars. So, do you have your own car, and do you drive yourself?
I do for work have a driver, but I drive a lot, evenings, weekends. So we do have our own cars. Right now, my garage is a little full of, my husband and son are rebuilding a 1971 Trans Am. Mm-hmm. So they're taking it down to the metal. Didn't realize it was going to take up that much space. And then we also have a 69 Camaro as well. So those are two vehicles along with the vehicles my children drive. And right now, from a company perspective, I'm driving an Escalade. I still need that trunk space.
If I were driving around on the weekend, could I look over and see Mary Barra driving a car?
Absolutely.
And if, this is hypothetical, an owner of another General Motors car happened to cut you off or get in your way, are you allowed to automatically recall that person's car?
No, I cannot.
Okay. So I thought I'd divide the conversation into two parts. One part is futuristic, future of General Motors, future of cars, and then I want to save a little bit of time at the end for more personal conversation about leadership lessons that Mary has picked up along the way. It's what I call the wisdom of Mary Barra. But let's just do the future first. So talk us through for a moment the frontiers of what people like. So I don't know where the frontier is, California or young people, but What do you see that we don't all yet know is coming in cars, but is going to be the next thing we all want?
Well, I think if you look at how technology is impacting every part of every industry, it's definitely having an influence on the auto industry and how people are going to move from point A to point B. And people are still going to need to move from point A to point B. So how do they do that? And the way we're driven is to look and say, how do we remove pain points and make that easier for everyone to move? If you drive right now in New York City, first of all, it costs a lot to own a car. And it's an asset that on average in the United States, most people only use 6% of the time. So a pretty expensive asset that's only being used 6% of the time. If you happen to be in New York, it costs money to park. When you get it out to drive, it's not exactly like you're enjoying the thrill of the road. You're in bumper to bumper traffic. When you get to where you want to go, if you can find a place to park, it's probably going to be pretty expensive. So those are all customer pain points. And when you think about ride sharing 1.0, that starts to influence why you see the growth. But today's ride sharing in the United States only represents 0.1% of total miles traveled. That's one of the reasons we're investing so much in autonomous technology, because we believe if you can take that cost down, you can open up how many miles traveled are done autonomously, do it more safely, and again, remove the pain points that people feel today when they're moving from point A to point B. So that's how we look at it, and we look at how technology can enable it, whether it's autonomous, that also improves safety. Because right now on, again, US statistics, which are easier to get, 90% of fatalities in the United States, and last year there was about 40,000, were caused by human error. So if you can use technology, autonomous driving, not only are you safer, you can take away a lot of pain points, make that type of transportation accessible to more people, and really change the way people move. But think about it in cities when you look at parking. And if you can really change the way cities come together, and all of a sudden parking isn't something you're part of the big plan, because right now in the United States, there are 3 non-residential parking spots for every car on the road. And so there's so much opportunity to make things more efficient, to make them safer. And then when we look at we believe in the science of global warming, so doing what's right for the environment. That's why we've said we believe in an all EV future. And we're now working on really what is our 4th generation of electric vehicles. So there's so much to be excited about of how we can change the way people move to do it more efficiently, safer, and better for the environment.
Mary has just done my whole outline. So let me thank Mary for joining us today, and it was good to be with you.
You gotta have the value message,
right.
in a quick message.
Let me anchor you in autonomous vehicles for a moment. General Motors bought Cruise, which is for $1 billion, which is making it the largest competitor to Tesla. So, and it'll launch somewhere, maybe the West Coast in 2019. Describe the car for us. Is it going to look like a car that we recognize? Steering wheel, brakes?
Well, so we have a Gen 3 model that we're using with our cruise automation technology that does have a steering wheel and brakes. We have a Gen 4 that doesn't have a steering wheel and brake pedals, and so we're working on both. Right now, there's regulations that require motor vehicle safety standards require a steering wheel and brake and accelerator pedals. So that's something, there's legislation right now that we're working to get permission to be able to put those vehicles on the road, but we can launch in either fashion. But I think what's more exciting of what's down the road, and what we announced with recently as Honda joined our autonomous vehicle activity of doing a purpose-built shared autonomous vehicle. And think about when you don't need to have a steering wheel and pedals, and how you can really change the way people move, make it more productive space for them, either individually or larger groups of people. So we're imagining that right now, and that's pretty exciting.
The 2019 car, it'll have a wheel and brakes, and the driver will sit on the left-hand side. Will the driver, in fact, not have to do anything? Just program the drive? We have different tracks. I say we have a evolutionary path with autonomous driving, and then we have what I call the revolutionary path. So if you look at what we're doing with Cruise, that's I'll say the get to the end game where you take the driver out, and there is the people in the vehicle are riding. There's no one driving. No human driving, because the car is driving itself. And that's what we're working to accomplish next year. And with our rate of iteration and improvement in the
vehicle. We feel that there's a huge opportunity to accomplish that next year. We will be gated by safety, and that's where we bring in the 100 years of knowledge of putting vehicles on the road to how to make that decision. So that's one track, and there'll literally be people there who no one needs to drive the vehicle.
Let me pause you on that track for just a moment. So that starts in 2019. We have cities from all over the United States, actually the world here. When will most of us be seeing cars like that, the cruise on our own roads in cities?
Well, I think once the technology is the hardest piece, and I think what a lot of companies who are working this are realizing is the technology to do is really hard. Our president, Dan Ammon, says it's really the most technological, the biggest, hardest technical challenge we'll face this decade, and maybe in our lifetimes. But being able to do that has such a promise of an improved world. It's worth investing and working on. So once we establish that, and again, we're on a path to do that next year, then it just becomes how fast you can roll that out, how the regulatory environment allows you to do that. We already have the ability to scale it, so it can go quite quickly. So I could see it, and it makes sense. What's happening with the vehicle is the vehicle continues to learn. It will then expand the boundaries of where you can operate. And the good thing is, while it's expanding in capability, we'll be taking the cost down, making it more affordable. So I think it's something that could impact many, many cities across the globe in a relatively short period of time, single-digit years, not decades.
And is this something you can do largely without, other than the cities allowing the regulating it in, that you can do without the cities, or do you need infrastructure for this?
You definitely need infrastructure, because we believe all autonomous vehicles should be electric vehicles, so the charging infrastructure is very important. But it's something I think it's very important to do with cities, because I think it can be done more efficiently, and it will be a win-win for the city, for the technology, and frankly for the residents of that city.
What does that mean? What do you need from the cities for cooperation?
I think it's important to determine the charging infrastructure. Where are the vehicles going to be stationed? They don't have to be in the parking complex right next to the busiest area of the business. I think the vehicles also have the opportunity to move it, help goods movement, because if you think about cities right now, it's not only people movement, but it's movement of goods. And so working together and looking how that can be done most efficiently, working with city planners and urban developers, I think allows us to do it much more efficiently, which will maximize the benefit. Let's
do energy efficient cars and electric cars. So it feels like GM, at least publicly, has done a 180, and this is in your term. Some of the materials that were sent to me from General Motors had no more gas, no more diesel, a remarkable quote, "We believe in climate change." Was that just a decision inside? Tell us the moment where you said, okay, we're just doing the leap.
I would say it's been for several years now. I think there were individual personalities at the company that challenged, and this is more than a decade ago, that challenged the science of global warming. But clearly, with the expertise we have in the company and people doing their own work, we never, from when I've been on the leadership staff and then in the CEO role, we never questioned it.
It's all been green lights.
So we knew we were on a path to electric vehicles. We also have worked for decades on fuel cells, because we believe fuel cells will be a part of the solution as well. So that's why our vision for the company is we're working hard for a world for zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion.
Do that again, the 3 zeros.
So zero crashes, because safety is the overriding priority. Then zero emissions, because we do believe we need to have that impact and from an environmental perspective. And then zero congestion, because for many people that most important currency is time. And so I step back and I look at General Motors. We're more than 100 years old. And 100 years ago, we gave people the freedom of mobility. Cars changed the way people live, the way they work, and really provided that freedom. But over these past 100 years, what happened with that is the risk of crash, the impacts to the environment, and then the congestion that we all face. I believe it's General Motors' responsibility to solve those issues with the technology that's available today to continue to provide mobility to more and more people across the globe, and even those who don't have access to it today in countries, whether they're young or have issues that don't allow them to drive. I see this as a huge opportunity and a responsibility of General Motors.
And how aggressive is the introduction of new electric cars? What's the schedule?
So I'm really proud of the fact that on the road right now we have not only the Chevrolet Volt, which is a extended range electric vehicle, but then we also have the Chevrolet Bolt, and it really was the first affordable all-electric vehicle with a range of 238 miles, which really has changed the dialogue. If you look at it now with some of the electric vehicles that are out on the road, it's not as much about range anxiety, now it's about charge anxiety. So I get for my most daily use cases, I'm fine with the range my electric vehicle has. But if I'm going to have to do something unexpected, how do I do the charging? So that's a piece of it. So very proud that we have the Chevrolet Bolt EV on the road today, and we have a very aggressive rollout between now and 2023 as we're working on our next generation platform that we have stated we want it to be obtainable, desirable, profitable, and have the right range. And so we're working aggressively. We have some of our best and brightest people working to make that objective a reality.
And if you had to guess, this is a professional urban audience largely. If you had to guess, when would you say half of us are driving all electric vehicles?
You know, I think it very much depends on us solving that equation, because once you have the profitability, once you have the right charging structure, I think customers are very rational and they'll make that decision. So, you know, we need to move on that path. That's one of the reasons we just last week announced that as there's dialogue going on in this country about what is the right fuel economy standards and greenhouse gas standards, you know, we're saying let's commit as a nation to electric vehicles. Other countries around the world are doing that. We don't want to lose our leadership position. But more importantly, if we commit and work together to get the infrastructure to help customers understand and make the transition, we can have a very significant number of vehicles on the road. There's been so many predictions, and there's factors. It's not just about the automobile companies doing this. It's about really governments, both city, state, and local, working together to make this a reality. And frankly, I think it should be a call to action to all of us to do that.
This is a question that maybe you won't be able to answer. Can you explain Tesla's stock price? So Tesla revenues last year, Tesla revenues were $12 billion. GM revenues were 12 times that, $145 billion. GM's market cap today is $46 billion. Tesla's market cap is $56 billion. The market has to have that wrong. Just give us whatever detail you can on that.
I can't really comment on Tesla, but what I can comment about General Motors, we're viewed as, the 100-year company, and there's always an excitement with what's new and innovative. And I think the story that we need to continue to tell better is just how much innovation we're doing. Our work with cruise automation, where we now not only have SoftBank investing, but also Honda investing, and how aggressively we're pursuing autonomous vehicles, how aggressively we're pursuing a path to have affordable electric vehicles. Our commitment to the environment with most of our plants around the globe running landfill-free, and our commitment by 2050 to run all of our operations with 100% renewable energy. So I think there's still the story to be told, but because of what happened to General Motors late last decade, so about a decade ago now, a lot of people lost confidence in us. So we have to work doubly hard to earn that respect and trust back, that we can be a company that not only innovates and grows, but leads. And that's what we come to work every day to do.
Is there any chance by the end of your tenure we could be thinking of GM as a technology company?
That is my goal. That is what drives me.
So let me change gears, though it's a dumb metaphor here.
I just said drive, so.
So I want to do the wisdom of Mary Barra. When we talked in my office, we talked a little bit about your mom and her significance. Do her backstory, and then talk about what she was like raising you.
So both my parents were born and raised in the Depression. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us today. And they came to Detroit for opportunity. I so enjoyed the last poem because they talked about people coming to the city for opportunity. My parents came from Upper Minnesota and the UP for opportunity in this in the Detroit area. And my mom grew up on a farm, had a very difficult upbringing with a lot of challenges, but she believed in the American dream. She believed my brother and I could accomplish anything we set our minds to do, and believed in the power of education. But also, the number one thing I learned from her and both my parents is hard work is what's going to happen. Hard work is the distinguisher. You work before you play, and that's how she raised my brother and I. And I've just, it's probably been the best advice and a value that's been ingrained that I could ever have.
Was she tough, demanding, high standards, performance?
She definitely. I mean, she was definitely the disciplinarian, and she was tough, but in an encouraging way. So, I mean, we had a wonderful family, and people, relatives, neighbors, everyone ended up at my mother's kitchen table. And so she created this warmth and this sense of community and family, but she had high expectations, but she then, as being a great mom, was always there when you needed her.
You gave me two sayings from her. One you just said, work before you play, and the other is whatever you do, do well. Mm-hmm. So when I was reading some of the profiles, I picked up a few of the Mary axioms. What I'd love to do is read you two of them, and then you just give us the backstory, just give some color. So one of them is, do the right thing when it's hard. What's the story behind that?
I think it was a huge learning for me with the organization when we went through the ignition switch recall that started in the 2024 timeframe. And one of the things I've tried to tell our whole organization is, when's the best time to solve a problem? The minute you know you have one. Problems rarely get smaller. So the minute you know something's going to, that's the time to solve it. So we've tried to create this culture of, let's make problems visible and let's solve them and work on them together. And then the do the right thing even when it's hard. I think one of the things we've also talked about is always acting with integrity, putting the customer at the center of everything we do. So sometimes you think you have a really hard decision of, what am I going to do? It might have an impact on, the profitability of the company. But if you step back, you know what you need to do. So I try to make sure, it's one thing at the most senior level that we hold ourselves accountable to always do the right thing, even when it's going to be hard. And I think we demonstrated that as we worked through the ignition switch recall. But I want every engineer, every single person working in the company to make sure that, they're looking and saying, okay, what's the right thing to do here? What's the right thing for the customer, for the company? And I believe if everyone has that value, it's going to translate into a better company, which will translate into better value for our shareholders.
Maybe we can do that just a little bit as a narrative, because you did it so quickly. I don't think people could understand how significant a moment this was. Mary had been in the job 2 weeks. She had just driven into her garage, and what began to come in was news that the ignition switch was malfunctioning. But that's a fleet of 30 million cars that ended up being recalled. There were 275 injuries, 124 deaths involved, and Mary's brand new in her tenure as CEO. So tell us from the garage forward to the next day or two when you made this decision of do the right thing when it's hard. Just do the story. Well,
I think, so again, I was actually sitting in my garage, had just gotten home, and was on a call with our head of product development telling me that we had learned on an issue that had been around people trying to understand that they had finally figured out what was happening and that we were doing this recall. And it's one of those, when you have an issue, a challenge, a crisis, you don't have perfect information on day one. In fact, it was probably 2 to 3 months before we really understood. We did an external investigation to really understand what had happened. And although this was an issue we were dealing with in 2014, the roots of it, the engineering work that had been done was done, really in the early 2000s or the late 1990s. And so really understanding what had happened, because even though the numbers are staggering and tragic, over that long period of time, the clues to understand what was happening were difficult. And that's, so as we lived worked through that, not exactly knowing what happened as we started. We came down to the guiding principles were going to be, we were going to do the right thing for the customer, we were going to be transparent, and we were going to do everything in our power to make sure something like this never happened again. And so that was kind of how we worked through the crisis, and that's where we, it was reinforced to me about when you have a problem or when you have an issue, solving it as quickly as you can is the most important thing. But then, making those decisions of, again, and my assessment of it is sometimes you think you have a decision and you really don't. There's only one path forward. There's only one right way to go forward, and that's what you have to do. And frankly, not bothering yourself, well, what about this and what about that? No, here's the right thing to do, and we'll deal with all those things, but it's not going to impact doing the right thing. That's what I, really, it was just magnified for me and for the leadership team. And, there's not a time when I don't give the organization a challenge where I also say, but we'll do it with integrity, because if you win without integrity, you really haven't won.
You actually touched on the second of the two axioms I was going to share. That is, this comes from a commencement speech that Mary gave at her own university. Problems don't go away when you ignore them. Then she went on to say, the ignition switch recall permanently changed me. It made me impatient. When is the best time to solve a problem? The minute you know you have it. So one more question category. The Sheryl Sandberg, Anne-Marie Slaughter conversation of whether women can have it all. You've raised 2 children, an empty nest now. You lead a 200,000 person firm, so it's kind of a good start. What do you know about this, whether women can have it all, and what do you tell young women? When I have the opportunity to mentor young women, one of the things I talk about, as you first, start on your career, I always look at it as a tree. And there's so many different branches and paths that you can follow. And what worries me sometimes is I'll speak to a young woman and she'll say, well, I know someday I want to have children, so I can't do this whole half of the tree. And I'm like, wait a minute. How can you slice off half of the opportunity with you imagining what something will be like that you're not, living through? Get there. And I didn't know how I was going to manage through it. I mean, the very first day I came to work when, and left my first child with in our daycare arrangements. That was not the easiest day of my life, but as you work through those, you can. And I have a wonderful husband and a wonderful support system. I also at General Motors have a wonderful team. And so you don't have to do it all by yourself. And if you don't view you have to do everything by yourself, you can do multiple things that are going to give you a rewarding life. And that's what I try to make sure. And at General Motors, it's a wonderful company to provide that, because there are times jobs are very demanding from a travel perspective, or maybe not standard hours, but there's also many really rewarding jobs where you can learn a lot in the company while you're not traveling as much, and you may have a standard work schedule. And so we offer that opportunity to people. And so I always say, and I'm talking a lot from a woman's perspective about starting a family, I don't want to have an environment where when a woman who may feel she needs to work, her career changes to a job. I want to make sure that it's still a career, and that's something we work really hard at General Motors to make sure that we provide those opportunities to do what's right for the individual in that period of time, but also not create a separate track. Amen.
That's a nice group. You are all very nice.
Mary flew in from China just a few hours ago, so all night to be with us. She didn't fly in from China the way we would fly in from China, but she has been up all night. So, Mary, thank you.
Thank you very much.